described him invariably as a person who seemed angry all the time, enraged all the time, someone who tended to keep to himself when he wasn't playing in these white power bands, but when he interacted with people, was basically enraged with society. So, someone who was fired from job after job because he couldn't get along with the people who were trying to exercise power over him, who was thrown out of the army because he was drunk on duty and eventually went AWOL. This is the pattern of someone who has antisocial personality disorder, violent, rootless, against society, and wanting to strike out against what they regard as the system. Now, look, there's a lot of people with antisocial personality disorder all throughout this society and other societies and the society where your listeners are right now. And most of them will not commit acts like this. But the ones who are particularly violent, like Paige, and who have a triggering act that combines with it, so something that makes them even more enraged, or they can't even tolerate it anymore. And this typically, as we see in the study, is a romantic breakup or a job loss or some kind of tremendous, unbearable insult. And we saw with Paige that, he moved to his last apartment just 2 weeks before he committed the shooting. By the way, right after the Denver shooting, so he was also probably inspired by those shootings. Bought his gun a week before. His girlfriend broke up with him. He was described by neighbors as bizarrely enraged about that, sitting in his truck with all his belongings in a box, looking enraged. And the next day, he was in that Sikh temple shooting away. This is the kind of crime we see, such as at Columbine, where you have someone who is an antisocial personality disorder. Something happens to them where they become so angry that they just can't bear it anymore. They're so angry that their own life is not worth anything anymore. They've been so humiliated. And all they want is vengeance and to go out in a blaze of glory and take people with them.
So that's more of a kind of turning point, whereas with Breivik and with Holmes, these were both meticulously planned executions. Breivik clearly had planned what he was going to do for a long time, and Holmes to the point where he'd booby-trapped his apartment. So, he wasn't just going out on a whim because he felt angry. He had planned that he was going to be going out there and doing it. Would a man like Holmes, as suffering from psychosis, would he have moments of lucidity where he's thinking clearly again and doubting how he's been planning something like that, or is there psychotic
That's an excellent question. So there's two questions inside of that question. First of all, how could someone with such a serious brain disorder be lucid enough to be able to plan such a complex crime, right? And then the second question is, would they have moments of lucidity that would be clear enough that they might doubt their own intentions? Yes. So let's do the first one. So there's different forms of schizophrenia, and the highest functioning, the one where people can still plan and think and act, even though they're acting on the basis of very delusional ideas, is paranoid schizophrenia. And that is most likely what Holmes has, believing that somehow there were forces out to get him. And that would allow him to engage in the kind of obsessive planning to turn his apartment into a absolutely wired nest of explosive devices. Did he have doubts, I think, is an exceptionally important question. And having worked with many of these people, what I would say is that in paranoid schizophrenia, particularly with someone that young, who is having what's called their first break, the origins of their psychosis, the answer would be yes, that there would be times when they were wondering if it's right, but they are being drawn more and more forcibly into the belief of the delusions. This is why, for example, in relation to your question, Holmes took this notebook, which included various drawings that appeared to indicate the crime that he would commit, and sent it to his psychiatrist. and we see this in other cases of paranoid schizophrenics who commit these crimes, they tell someone before they commit the crime. In fact, in the Secret Service study, in virtually every single one of these episodes, they tell someone beforehand.
Just today, the University of Colorado has hired a former U.S. attorney to conduct an independent review into how the school handled the home situation.
The same thing was done at Virginia Tech. That's right.
Dr. Alan Lipman, if you had been bought a notebook with detailed plans of a massacre that you were planning by one of your...
I was thinking about just this the other day.
It just beggars belief that a professional, Dr. Lynn Fenton, could not have just raised the alarm as loudly as she possibly could.
Well, I will not blindly fall into sheepish, unthinking defense of the profession of psychiatry, number one.
Good.
Number two, it is true that we do not know the circumstances under which Fenton was operating. Hindsight is always 20/20, and we don't know the precise information in that notebook and how clearly it indicated a potential for violence. That having been said, however, there is a law in the United States called the Tarasoff Law. It's based on a very famous case that occurred in California where a psychiatrist, I think, might have been a psychologist, was told by a patient that he planned to go out and kill his girlfriend, and the clinician did not make a warning to police, and this individual did indeed go out and kill the girlfriend. And as a result of this, the concept was developed of a duty to warn. That if you are a mental health clinician, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a social worker, all the various forms of people who do this work, you have strict confidentiality except when somebody tells you that they are going to kill somebody else or they're going to kill themselves. And if they tell you that, you are bound by law to contact authorities to prevent that attack from happening. And it does appear to be the case that Fenton, the psychiatrist at the University of Colorado at Boulder, seemed to believe that there was enough justification of dangerousness on the part of Holmes that she did warn others, though it's not clear that she made a Tarasoff warning, which perhaps those facts will become more clear, but if that is the case, well, perhaps understandable, it causes me great concern.
Would she be able to be prosecuted if that is the case?
Yes, but we should treat that situation with the greatest caution because, of course, we're operating in the realm of hypothesis and speculation. You know, law is based upon factual circumstances, and you and I have what we've learned from the press, which is a series of points on a line and gigantic gaps, and I've seen a lot of these cases. The answer is we will see. You know, these cases can be very surprising. I was very involved in the Jared Loughner case, who obviously was psychotic, and here in the United States, people were getting all caught up in the politics of it. You know, is he leftist? Is he rightist? He was neither. He was schizophrenic, for God's sake. And he was treated forcibly with medications and to the point where he was competent to stand trial, and finally being non-psychotic after many months of treatment, after forcible medication. It looks like he's going to put in a guilty plea. So some of the time you don't know what's going to happen here.
With your experience of dealing one-to-one with people suffering from psychosis or schizophrenia or so on, when a man like James Holmes is taken into custody, his stimuli, if you like, are taken away from him. His privacy is taken away from him. In other words, he's I assume to be kept in a cell with no access to films or anything, and he's basically there on his own. What would a psychotic be feeling? Would he be frightened? Would he be? He looked terrified when he was brought into the court the next day.
He certainly did look absolutely terrified. Now, There are many possible interpretations of that. There was a report, I don't know if it is accurate, but he was also claiming amnesia for the events, which would not be consistent with a typical psychosis, perhaps an atypical psychosis. I did raise question for me, but it was a single report, and, with these events, there are invariably all kinds of false facts that blossom up in kind of a predictable pattern. First, people think there are multiple shooters, and then it's a single shooting, this sort of thing, so we don't know.